Do you have the ability to survive in a long-term grid down or other situation where it's cold?
And it is really cold here right now. But today, this is part 2. We interviewed Jim Phillips, and he talked about short-term emergencies. But today, we're going to interview Jim Phillips again, and today we're going to talk about how to survive the freezing cold in a long-term grid down kind of event. So watch it so you don't have to freeze like me.
Hey, Provident Preppers, we are excited to be back here with Jim Phillips. We are talking about cold weather and how to survive cold weather. Now, we did part 1 already, is talking about emergencies, which is different than disasters. Emergencies are typically a shorter term. This is a longer term that we're talking about today, and Jim Phillips is the expert. He has studied cold weather survival for many years. He was doing that when I was a junior high student. So he is the guy that understands this, and he's going to teach us today about staying warm. Now, if you didn't see module 1 or the first part of this, you'll want to go back and check it out because there's a lot of great information there. We're going to add on to that today. So Jim, why don't you take that away?
Okay, be glad to. And it's good that you identified the fact that we have emergencies which happen really all the time. We get stuck in little things and power's off for a few hours, but it's the disaster. It's the catastrophic things that most people really are not prepared for. And I like to help people get ready for that. It's not that we're looking for them. I'm not a gloom and doom kind of a guy, but there's a potential for things to happen long term to individuals, communities, whole nations globally. I don't know, but you want to be ready, because if you're not ready, you suffer. Now, I'm old enough, being over more than 3/4 of a century old, I've gone through a few things, and I've learned I don't like pain. And as you mentioned, I really got my start into teaching these things and in the classes. It was all about cold weather, because what I realized back in the early 80s when this became my profession, that people are very poorly prepared to deal with cold weather long term. They're just not ready to, they don't do that. We don't have to do it. We have all the central heat and all the utilities and things like that. And thank goodness they're there. And when you see the disasters come in some of the areas with the big hurricanes and tornadoes that destroys the infrastructure, you see literally pouring into town hundreds and hundreds of power trucks and other people that come to the assistance. Okay, that's great. That's wonderful. What if they can't come because they're in the same mess? And you are really on your own. You may not be on your own all by yourself, but your community, your area is not going to have any outside help. That's kind of how you define a true disaster, is that outside help is not going to come for months, maybe weeks and months. You got to take care of it now, particularly in the winter, because in the winter you can be hurt. You can be dead very quickly when the conditions are bad. And it doesn't have to be extremely cold. We actually lose more people to hypothermia, die from hypothermia above freezing than below zero, because people get caught out in the rain and the wind and things like that, and cold water immersion and things. So it doesn't have to be extremely cold. And so I want to emphasize to people that's like, well, okay, I live in a place where it only goes down into maybe into the 20s, a few times a year. Well, 20s unprotected will kill you. It'll certainly cause pain in a hurry. And if it's going to be long term, you have to start thinking early on. When we have the emergency, the things happen, it's kind of like, I can just tough this out for a few days, and if I just get out of here and there's help coming. What you want to do is, when you recognize something very serious is going on, you've got to get your attitude in there real quickly. And your attitude is going to simply say, not to be negative or gloom and doom. Your attitude is going to be like, this is not going away for a long time. It's up to me. It's up to my household. It's up to my neighborhood. If we don't do it, nobody's going to take care of us. So you want to get rid of this attitude, this feeling of dependency that somebody's going to come to the rescue. Now, if they do, hallelujah. But don't count on it, because if they can't get there, then you're in trouble. So that's the first thing you've got to do, is adjust your attitude. And, when we were talking before, and I would encourage people to go back and look at where I spent a little more time on these principles. One of these principles, talk about this law of provident living, because it's about spiritual attitude, knowledge, and then stuff. And stuff is at the bottom of the list. Now, stuff is very, very important. The material things are very, very important. But what's more important than that is that you develop the attitude that says, I can do this, I'm ready to do it. But the reason you're ready to do it is because you have knowledge about how and why things work. You've prepared yourself with information, with some skills, and you may also have some stuff. Now, you don't want to be stuff dependent, because if you're caught in an emergency because you were traveling, going someplace, and your kit that you have, all your supplies that are in the basement of your house, well, they're back home. And you're out here, you're visiting somebody, you're traveling, or what have you. You don't want to be stuff dependent. You try to have stuff as much as you can and carry it with you. But if you have nothing, you don't want your attitude to be, well, I've lost my kit, my stuff, I guess I'm going to die. That's a bad attitude. So get on top of your attitude in a hurry and say, I've got to take care of these things. Then it comes down to having an understanding that says, okay, what do I need to know about the world? Well, when it comes to staying warm, in the cold weather side of things, it's two things that you're going to be playing with all the time. One of them is you want to retain the heat. You want to preserve body heat. Whether you're going to do that in a structure that you're inside of that's warm or not really cold, or if it's just going to be your clothing. Because my definition of clothing is personal, portable shelter. So ultimately, it comes down to having the right clothing, and that's what you want to be focusing on for much of your preparation for cold weather. Not all of it, but much of it needs to be about having clothing that you would be able to be in your freezing house, your house that is below freezing because the utilities have been off. You don't have a backup way of making heat to heat the whole house. Maybe you can do a little bit of cooking, a little bit of lighting and things like that, but you can't heat the whole house. And so you want to have the clothing that will allow you to stay warm, to preserve your heat when you're in a cold space, whether it's outside or inside a house. Now, how do you know you've done that? Well, here's the things about clothing. Number one, it has to be fat. It has to be thick. Thick clothing, we say heavy winter clothing. No, it's not heavy. It's going to be thick and lightweight, so it has lots of air in it. So you're looking for that, and you need to practice with these things. You say, well, I have these parka and I have these pants and things that they have a hang tag on them, good for 20 below zero. Well, go try them. Don't try them at 20 below zero because you're going to be disappointed. Go try them out at 10 degrees and see what it's like. Because a lot of times these ratings that are on clothing are short-term ratings, and they're counting on the fact that you're going to be active and that you may have a warm place to go into. When I talk about the clothing ratings, when I give it on things that I've done or made, then it is continuously in that temperature without activity. In other words, a sleeping bag, if it says 20 below zero, I want to be able to sleep for 8 hours in a sleeping bag and stay warm at 20 below zero. Stay warm, not just I survived. I don't like survival. I've tried it. So practice with some of these things and realize that the hang tags, I call them baloney tags. So what's really critical is you start to experiment with this stuff. You know what things will and will not do. So you want thick, lightweight clothing, sleeping bags, and things like that. Now, there's some things that are better than others. We don't have time to do that here, but on my website, you can learn about some of those things where I teach really what you want for long term. I teach people how to live below zero. You can sit on a stump at 20 below zero, being sedentary and be comfortable day after day after day. Been there, done that, and I've taken people to do that. I also take them out and we can sit in a blizzard, screaming, howling below zero blizzard, and be comfortable just with our clothing. But it's not much of what you buy downtown. The other part, so anyway, I'm just saying you can do it. If you want to learn about it, I can teach you. Other people can teach you some of those things. But the other thing you need to know about your clothing is this other principle on here, release moisture. That's really critical because you give off moisture all the time. Even you say, well, I'm not sweating. The fact that you're sitting still awake or laying down asleep, you're giving off humidity. And you can prove that to yourself by just go get a baggie, stick your hand in that baggie, and what does it feel like after 30 seconds? You can feel the humidity building up in there because there's moisture that comes through your skin. Now, moisture is critical to you because water in your insulation transfers heat 25 times faster than air. So waterproofing is your enemy when it's cold. So I don't want clothing that's going to be waterproof or even waterproof breathable. When it's well below freezing, there's no water to get me wet except inside my clothing. I've got to allow the moisture to come out of the clothing. Even if I'm going to be living in my house, If you have clothing like cotton, in particular, wool or down, they're hydrophilic materials. They like water. They collect it. And so now you have to take them off and you have to dry them and service them. I want things I can wear 24/7 and I don't have to do anything, because if I'm in cold weather, really cold weather, I don't want to be undressing. It hurts. Been there, done that, tried that. So you want things that allow the moisture to pass through it. So those are some of the rules that we're trying our very best to live by, so that I can be comfortable in my, as I talk about it, a less cold structure, less cold house. Utilities are off for 2 or 3 months, or off for all winter. Then what I'm going to be thinking about, my attitude, when we go back to this attitude thing, is I'm thinking about, okay, I'm sheltered. I have a less cold house. That's much better than outside in the blizzard. So rejoice at that. Now I have to have clothing that takes care of me and bedding that takes care of me. And I may be doing a little bit of cooking on a little, a cook stove, one of these little butane countertop things, or I may have another Camp Chef kind of a thing, propane. Be careful with those things, particularly long term, because they produce carbon dioxide. At least they're consuming oxygen. But some of them, by the way, every year we have people die from carbon monoxide poisoning because they're trying to run their charcoal cooker in the house. That'll kill you. They run their white gas stove, their gasoline stoves in the house to give some light and or to give some heat or to cook some things. You can't do that. Well, you can, but you shouldn't do it because the carbon monoxide. So you have to think in terms of what do I do to be safe long term? The other thing that I want to emphasize, and this is in the area of the body and the how the body works. But the one I want to focus on the most, we did this last time, but I want to hit it really, really heavy here. That's in the nutrition area. But in the nutrition area, most people don't think about hydration, about water. Yes, you do want to have some food, but you could go a couple of weeks without eating food in the winter in your clothing if it's adequate, and you would be able to live through that. Wouldn't be pleasant necessarily. But if you went more than just a day without drinking water, you are going to be in serious trouble. And if you're in cold weather, really cold weather, let's say you're either outside or your house is now well below freezing, then you dehydrate very rapidly in the cold. It's a law of physics. We talk about laws of physics. Laws of physics says moisture will, notice the word I said will, moisture will move from where it's warm to where it's cold. Your body is warm. It better be warm. So it's warm inside. It's 98.6 degrees inside. Outside, it's 10 degrees, 20 degrees below zero, or whatever it is. The moisture wants out there in the worst kind of a way. Now, in your clothing, that's good, where we don't have waterproofing, because if I get a little sweat or perspiration or somehow get my clothing wet, the moisture will go out of it very quickly, because inside the clothing, it's warm inside next to you. It wants out, so it'll just blow to the outside. But this is bad for your body because you dehydrate very rapidly. And here's how you dehydrate very rapidly. You've all seen this thing when you breathe out in the cold, you see that cloud of vapor, that cloud of steam that comes out of you. That's water moving right from your bloodstream through the lung tissue into the cold air. And you can breathe away a half a gallon to a gallon of water a day, depending on how cold it is and how hard you're huffing and puffing. And when you breathe away that amount of water, you're in trouble very, very quickly. So one of the things I want to teach people to do is when you're dealing with in the cold, and particularly it's going to be going on for very long at all, it is extremely important that you stay hydrated. So drink water constantly. If you have a dry mouth, you are dehydrated. You don't want to wait until you're thirsty with a dry mouth. You want to drink enough water that you'd never get to having a dry mouth and feel thirsty. Now then you're able to produce you can produce the maximum amount of heat you're capable of producing through your digestion, circulation, and things like that. So long-term hydration is extremely important. Now, if you've lost utilities and you don't have the natural gas, you don't have the propane delivery that can come to you anymore, or you don't have the electricity, then you've got to have alternate ways of heating to cook and or to make water. Now, in the winter, one of the blessings of cold weather disasters is they are usually very often accompanied by snow. There may be ice and things like that. So that gives you a source of water. Now, you may, in fact, need to go to streams or other places like that. Then it gets into how do we purify that water and keep it clean. But you've got to have water. and you must have copious amounts of water very, very quickly, right at your fingertips, so that you can drink water constantly in the cold. So in the nutrition area, that's what's most important. Then of course, you need the foods, and you want high calorie foods, and you want to have foods that burn for a very long period of time in the body. What are those? They are not carbohydrates. They are not sugars, especially sugars. Your best fuel for cold weather, for hard work and those things, is in fact fat. That is your best source of heat and nutrition for energy. Now, you need the proteins. Yes, you do need the other macronutrients and micronutrients and things. And yes, you're going to have some other things. But actually, the Arctic diet is going to consist of fat, either animal fat and or butter fat, which are the best for you. And that's a whole story for another time. People go like, we've been told that animal fat's bad for you. It's not. It is actually the healthiest of the fats. You need to study that if you don't know that. But eating that, and then the proteins, good sources of protein. Again, animal meat is a good source of protein. There's some others too, but you want to have the fat because it burns slow and long, and it'll take care of you a long period of time. Sugar is a quick burn. It burns off, and it has other problems with it, and particularly some of the other things that are mixed with it that are going to give you health issues long term. So you want to have the nutrition that's going to be slow burning. So the fats, the pemmican and things like this are great. Learn about them so that you'll understand what's going to be the best thing for you to store and have. Because really what we want to talk about is being ready to deal with the long term. It's very difficult to move in from I've done nothing, I'm not prepared, and then the utilities are going to be off for the next year or so and I haven't done anything. That's going to be a tough one. And so I want to think, if you're thinking long term, you want to be doing things ahead of time to be ready for it. And so you're setting aside some of the supplies and materials, and you're getting education so you're okay. So in the nutrition area, water is first. Water is king, more important than anything else. So you want to take care of that. Now, understanding how the cold affects the body is that it does sap your energy, so your metabolism is going to be higher. Your body trying to stay warm, it wants to eat more. And so your little survival supplies that you buy one of those units of them, they say they provide 1,500 calories a day. That is 1,500 calories a day is starvation diet. That if you are sedentary and a full-size adult, 1,500 calories a day will allow you to sit around and not do anything in shirt-sleeve weather, and you'll have enough to take care of you and not lose weight. But when you get into cold weather and into winter, you're going to be needing to have 2,500, 3,500 calories, particularly if you're working hard. And if it's a long-term emergency, disaster that's occurred, you may be working very, very hard to take care of you, your family, and people around you. So, 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 calories a day is not unreasonable at all. And you won't be getting fat on those things as long as it isn't sugar and, empty calories and things like that. That's hard on you. So you want to have good whole foods. And you won't be gaining weight on 4,500 calories a day when you're working hard. So you want to have the foods that will sustain you, and the foods is what's going to help you, the food and the water, so that you have the metabolism to produce the heat, so that your clothing, where you're retaining the heat by the insulation that you have on, now you've got heat to retain. If you don't have the nutrition and you don't have the hydration, you're going to freeze to death, even if you have perfect clothing, because you're not going to produce heat. So these things go hand in hand. That's why they tie together. It's about the laws of physics. It's the laws of physiology and those things. And then it comes down to your attitude dealing with these things, long-term disasters. You've got to get a handle on your attitude. I already mentioned that. You've got to take a look at it and say, I got this, I can do it, it's inconvenient, but we'll deal with it because you have been making provisions. Now, if you haven't made provisions, you don't know what to do, it really comes down to somebody better come rescue you, is what it is. On a snowshoe trip many, many years ago, came across, we had a Boy Scout group with us, and we were taking, and we got caught in a blizzard up on a mountain peak, and we were making our way through that blizzard, and came upon an individual that was sitting down, leaning up against a tree, and he looked up, and his words were, and how he said it, if I can just, he said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I guess I'm going to die. That was his attitude. Now, his attitude was he wasn't prepared for the weather. He wasn't prepared for that. He didn't expect that. He got caught in it. He didn't know what to do. Now, there were things that he could have done with what he had, but he didn't have the understanding of what to do. Now, we came along and rescued him. It was just give him a hand and say, look, I can't carry you. I got my own pack. But what I can do is take my hand. We'll get up here and we're going to where we can be okay. And you can come along with us. So in that case, rescued an individual and nothing bad happened to him. But before we came along, he was going to die. That's as simple as that. So you've got to get ahead of your attitude and your outlook. And because you've been making provisions and you have a reason to do this and you want to take care of your family and other things, it's all in there. The other thing is you need to keep a handle on your fear. And that's something you need to learn about. I won't do much here, except I will tell you this. It is impossible to fear anything for which you have true and complete knowledge. That's what you're after, is you want to get true and complete knowledge about these things, and then you will never fear it because you know what to do about it. You can handle it, and you've been making provisions for it. So anyway, those are very important things, and the attitude will kill you faster than anything else when you look and say, the power's out, it was whatever it is. Okay, it was EMP, it was war, it was whatever it is, one of these really nasty things. And the power's out, and you know it's out. You got to get a handle on your attitude right away and say, okay, well, we'll just move into it and take care of it. So I can't emphasize that enough about your attitude. It's just like water. Water's so critically important. Stay hydrated. Your attitude, critically important. Internal communications, what you say to yourself when you talk to yourself inside your head. Wow. If you're smiling on the outside, but you're going like, I'm going to die on the inside, I don't know what to do, that will not serve you well. And if it's something you don't know what to do, it said, I'm not sure what to do yet. You can put down in it, but I'm going to figure it out. I intend to figure this out. That kind of communication will help you move forward. But I don't know what to do will cause you to be paralyzed. So you've got to get a handle on that. Because again, this is the laws of physics, the laws of physiology that you're trying to work with. One of the other things you should be doing ahead of time that we talk about all the time, it's about developing relationships with people around you and building a positive community. Know your neighbors. Know what they can do, what they cannot do. In some cases, you want to know your neighbors because this guy's scary and I need to try to get away from him, hope he moves or what have you. But you want to develop the relationships because you're going to need to learn from each other. I have very extensive skills, knowledge, understanding in cold weather, extreme cold weather. When I was 20 years old, I was above the Arctic Circle for the first time. My dad and I went camping up there for 2 weeks, lived out on the frozen polar ice cap, 600 miles north of the Arctic Circle, with nothing but our backpacks and our stuff that we took with us. Lived up there for 2 weeks, had a wonderful time. So I have depth of experience having done this all over. So I'm really good at that, but there's a lot of things I'm not really good at, or my experience is very limited. So I really do count on some of my neighbors around me to fill in some of the gaps in my understanding, knowledge, and skills. I will help them. They will help me. So you need to develop your relationship with people. And if you think I'm going to do this on my own and take care of myself on my own, you will find out that's not going to work in the long run. We need each other. So developing the relationships in the community is extremely important, because the way I put it, and I put it in a class that I teach, which is called We're All in This Together. It's a real simple idea, and it is about developing this community idea, because you're either going to thrive as a community. I don't mean a municipality. I mean a tribe would be another word, but I've always used community. We're going to do it together as our neighborhood, our people that we live and work together, or we're going to die in isolation. So you want to develop that community spirit and be doing those things right now, not waiting until, oh my heck, the world's just not the way it used to be, and I better go figure out who my neighbor is because I don't even know his name. A bad time to be figuring that out, because you learn trust over a period of time. So now that, again, going back to the principles, because the principles are where it's really at. It's not about a list of things. It's about, I need to retain my body heat. How do I do that? Well, I do that with clothing. If I'm in a cold space, I get into as warm a space as I can get into, or as less cold as I can get into, and then my clothing is going to make up the difference. And when I go to bed, because my physiology metabolism is lower, then I'm going to put on more nighttime clothing. We call it a sleeping bag or bedding. And so that's all you're trying to do is look around you and say, what do I have that I can use? Some of the things we talked about in the first course will fit here again about using materials you have, the couch cushions, the bedding, the cut up chairs and seats and things like that, newspaper wadded up, other paper wadded up. What can I find in my house, in my surroundings that will take care of me? Because all I need is it's trapped, stabilized, dry, non-moving air. That's how we retain heat. That's all that insulation is. But then for clothing, things you're going to be wearing, I want to be able to get the moisture away from me, because if it stays next to me, not only does it, doesn't feel good over time when you get kind of soppy wet, but it'll also cause harm to the insulation, because the insulation is now not as good as it used to be. And the fact that your skin will rot and fall off of you we call it trench foot or immersion foot. If you have waterproof footwear you're wearing continuously again and again and again, like the trenches in World War I, then you had people literally the skin rotted off their feet. Lots of injury. We lost more people to cold injuries in World War I than we did to bombs and bullets. And the same was true of the Korean War. The weather and the Napoleonic Wars. He lost his army to Napoleon, and so did the Germans to the Russians and things. Weather has always been a problem, particularly a big one in war. Hope we don't do that. But I'm just simply saying cold, if you're not prepared for it, is your enemy. Make it a friend. It's like cold is a friend. Of course it is. It's a friend in other ways. When you get your attitude right and you understand how these things work, why is cold a friend? Well, for one thing, it'll stop the spread of disease. If you're out in the cold, you won't get sick out in the cold. Now you come into a auditorium where there's 5,000 unhappy people in this semi-warm place sneezing and coughing on each other. You don't want to go there because that'll spread disease. Go to your house, let it be cold. Nobody wants to come visit you that isn't prepared for the cold, so they're not going to come bring their disease with them, and you live in your cold house or in the igloo or in the tent. You won't get sick unless you're around people, and those critters die very quickly in the air. So it's actually cold as your friend. And then if you have other things, this is kind of an advanced topic, and I want to be careful about saying these things because some people go like, well, that's just a thought too far. But when you have something that happens long term and it's serious, there will be a lot of things dying, plants, animals, people. And you don't like to think about that, but it's a reality. Just look at the things that have happened around the world since human history began. And things happen and death does occur. Well, when those things occur in the cold, that's preserving for things because the bacteria doesn't grow. So it gives you some advantages about things that may be, going on around you that we hopefully we prevent, but you've got to understand that will give you protection. The other thing about the cold is you don't have the bikers ride into town on their Harleys in the winter to come bust up things when you're in the Yukon or someplace where it's cold. They don't go out riding when it's 20 below zero. They're going to be where the people are. They're going to Phoenix in the winter, I guess is what it is. I'd rather be in the Yukon in the winter because they ain't going to show up on their Harleys. It keeps the street people down. It keeps the rioters down and things like that is what I'm saying. And so it's a friend if you're prepared to deal with it. So you want to be prepared to deal with the cold and winter. And then the other thing that's really important is very often in the winter and cold weather, there is water laying all over the ground out there that you can pick up because the pipes may not be running. So go outside, gather the snow, melt it, which is what you need to do. So you're going to want to have some sources of heat so that you can melt some water, and that'll give you a little bit of heat in a space. So you want to have that ability to melt snow and ice so that you would have water. You may also need to boil it to, kill off pathogens in it, depending on what your source is. So winter and cold weather can be your ally if you're prepared to deal with it. So if we're talking about disasters, be ready to deal with the cold and take care of yourself, not be a burden to other people. So that was all about principles and concepts. If you want to look at something specific, we'll talk about that.
Okay, yes, I've got a couple of scenarios that maybe we can discuss briefly. Of course, one is the one that most of us prepare for is a grid down situation. We've referred to that a little bit. The other, I was interviewing with a reporter out of Ukraine just the other day, and she was relaying to me the depth of the disaster, if you want to call it, there. People without homes. They, in some areas, have electricity, but only for brief periods of time. And winter is on. Their temperatures are in the 20s and teens, and a lot of difficult situations. So maybe briefly, if you could hit. We've already talked a little bit about some important concepts, but what else?
So, and when we look at this, like one of the things the reporter wanted to know was what practical things can we tell these people in Ukraine so that they can survive? What practical tidbits do they need?
Right.
Right. So we've done the principles, but let's bring it home.
Okay. Well, one of the things, of course, when people are cold and they're out in the cold, however they got there, then hydration, it goes back to what I already said. So it's to me, one of the most important things is you've got to have a source of water. That's one of the most important things you've got to be looking for, other than the fact that you might be in a bathing suit and it's 20 below zero, you're going to need some insulation real quick. But let's assume you've done something in that area. Then hydration becomes the next most important thing you must do. And what the problem is this, he's going like, no, I'm cold, I'm shivering, this is miserable. I understand that. But you're also probably not producing enough heat. If you haven't been drinking regularly, you're not producing as much heat as you're capable of producing, burning the fats that are in your body or the sugars that are in your liver. You can't utilize them when you're dehydrated. So now you're not producing as much heat. So it really comes down to this principle, just looking at the physiology, the nutrition, and those kinds of things that you need to have, the hydration, and then finding clothing. Now, again, it comes down to how do you cover yourself up? You've got to look for things that are lightweight, that are full of air is what you're looking for. Or if they're heavyweight, that's okay. You just need more of it because you're trying to get this trapped, stabilized, non-moving air around you. So those things become very important. Now, there's other things that you do, particularly if you're exposed to the elements, you're outside, and or you're in a house that's been damaged and it doesn't have windows and doors. This is where you'd like to have available to you plastic sheet and visqueen so you can plug up those holes. So duct tape and plastic sheet is a wonderful thing to have supplied so that I can put my windows and doors back in. And even if I haven't lost my windows and doors, just putting that up over the windows that exist will mean there'll be less infiltration of cold air from the outside. So now I'll have a not as cold a space as I would have otherwise. So you think in terms of those things, just looking around, what is it? How am I losing heat? Am I losing heat out of my house, my structure, my car? Is there anything I can do to plug up that heat loss or to prevent the infiltration of cold air? And then how do I keep my body warm? Because ultimately, it's about keeping you warm. That's why it always comes back to me. It's always back to the clothing that I can be comfortable at, below zero. Now, when you talk about clothing, what kind of clothing should that be? The worst thing that you can be putting on and wearing, particularly inside next to you, is anything that's made out of cotton. You got to get rid of the cotton if you can. Now, if that's the only thing you have, you got to use it, but you're going to have a problem keeping it dry, because it wants to absorb the moisture that's coming off your body. Even if you're not sweating, the little bit of vapor that's trying to come off, and remember, law of physics says that moisture wants to move from where it is warm to where it's cold. Your skin, the surface of your body, is warm compared to the outside. It wants out. But if you surround yourself with cotton in particular, cotton absorbs moisture. It's hydrophilic, hydro, water, philic, affinity for, love of. So you try to get rid of the cotton. What's the next best thing that you're going to have that's natural? Well, it would be wool. Wool is slower on the uptake of water. So if you're scrounging around trying to find things, then you want to get wool. Yeah, it's scratchy next to your hide. Well, that's where you'd like to have a polyester or polypropylene or something that would be more comfortable inside. And then you put the wool out from that. And the only place you would want to use cotton is on the very outside of your clothing. If you're stuck with that, big blue jeans, okay, they're cotton. Get them on the outside. Putting on 3 layers of blue jeans is not going to do you very good because it's going to pick up and hold the moisture. Get something else inside better than that. The wool would be better, and or the synthetics are better yet. The polyesters, the polypropylenes. In my case, I use the urethane foam to make the clothing out of, because the foam will outperform anything else. But you have to, that's kind of very specialized. But for me, if I have couches and cushions and seats and things like that, and I cut them things up, I'm going to get them inside next to my hide, next to me, because what it is with that foam, not the closed cell foam, this is the open cell stuff you can blow air through. And when you put that next to you, its structure, it's all synthetic. It doesn't want to absorb moisture, and the structure is very open so that the moisture will move through it. It doesn't wick through it. It's moisture vapor transfer. The moisture coming off your body, it wants to evaporate into a gas, and particularly if it's cold outside, it wants outside in the worst kind of a way. So no waterproofing on the outside and all synthetics inside, foam being the best thing. The moisture will just blow right through it to the outside, yet it'll retain the heat. And so this is what you're looking for. You want to understand these laws, and then you say, what can I substitute that'll do better than what I've got? So no cotton next to you, wool. Now, what about down? Well, down's nice stuff, but you've got a problem keeping it dry. Down is also hydrophilic. And when it gets wet, it collapses, it clumps together. It's about as insulative as cooked oatmeal. And the advantage of cooked oatmeal is at least you can eat it to get some energy out of it. You can't eat the down. So if you can keep down dry and you have a way of servicing it and getting where you can dry it, it's beautiful, wonderful stuff. But once it gets wet, it clumps together. It's a mess. And so I want the synthetics, the polyesters in particular, the polyester batting that you'll find that's kind of the artificial down. That does a pretty good job. The best thing of all is the urethane. That's what I focus on every place that I can. Now, if you're using layers, because that's what everybody's taught, they're taught use layers because it's almost like a religion. You have to use layers. No, you don't. Nature doesn't use layers. We can learn from nature. The Arctic fox doesn't use layers. It gets a thicker layer when it's cold. It gets a thinner layer when it's warm. And it is a layer that allows moisture to escape, and it comes out of it very easily. So we learn a lot of things from nature. But people will typically use layers because it's kind of intuitively easy to understand is, okay, it's cold, put on more. Okay, it's warm, take off some of them. But here again, you want to pay attention to what's on the inside. So when we talk layers, I want non-hydrophilic materials, non-cotton especially. Prefer to not have any wool next to me either, if I can. I want to have synthetics in there next to me, and as much synthetic as I can. And then to the outside, I would put either the wool or the cotton all the way on the outside. And the advantage that cotton has over synthetics is it doesn't melt. And so in particular, if you're going to be working around where you may have, fire, burn barrels or campfires or anything like that, you'll really want to have non-synthetics on the outside because the synthetics will melt and burn. So that's where I put my wool and my cotton is all the way on the outside so I don't catch myself on fire. I camp when I go in the winter at below zero. We do it no fire, no shelter. Don't have any fire. There's no way to melt the clothing, and so mine is synthetic all the way through, with the foam and all the materials are polyesters, nylons, and urethanes, and they can't melt because no fire, and so it's not an issue. But you have to think about these things and understand how they work so you do it properly.
Okay, let's talk just a little bit about creating a microenvironment. So we talked a little bit about that in the first video, but that is one of the things that we've found was incredibly helpful, was setting up that tent in the family room, right? And hanging out in it, or over the bunk beds, throwing the big blankets over it, and then sleeping together underneath so you've got that combined body heat.
That's right.
Things like that.
Absolutely.
That's really important principle.
And you can do that with, let's say you don't have a tent, but if you have a tarp, particularly some of these plastic tarps, then you make it out of that, and that'll stabilize the air in there. Now, it'll trap the moisture is one of the problems. You get condensation all over the inside of it, but it's away from you, so that is okay. But you'd like to have I'll say a tent material, a fabric material that's very wind tight, wind resistant, but it's inside your house or inside of another shelter. Even if you were down in an emergency shelter, take your tent, set it up. That'll give you some privacy, but it'll also trap the warmth in there because that shelter may not be all that warm. It may be cold too. People are hanging out there to be together. Of course, that's where they're going to get sick. I already mentioned that, so it's best to stay away from that if they don't have the utilities and things. But yeah, making that microclimate using tarps, blankets, plastic sheet, tents, anything that you've got, even just a good old tarp, old cotton tarp, that'll do it. Just something to trap that air around you. It's going to be warmer in there than it will be on the outside. So very useful thing to do.
We had one of our viewers that even talked about how she had a big refrigerator box, And that's what she did. She just slept in that refrigerator box.
Right.
So
You can do
there's
that.
all kinds of options.
Right.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is now you're looking for insulation materials, and let's say that you've got everything you've got. You don't have enough bedding or things like that. Cardboard cardboard is a good insulator. It's a reasonable insulator. Not corrugated cardboard, and several layers of that. It'll stabilize the air around you, and if you can make it into a box or tie it down somehow so it'll be close to you, make it into a peaked thing over you. But a big old refrigerator box is really nice. You'd really like to get that box down a little bit smaller and closer to you, unless you had 2 or 3 people in there. So use cardboard, use newspaper. If you're still taking a newspaper, we don't see as many of those, but newspaper is actually very useful to lay sheets of that on you, because it traps little bits of air in between. Those little layers of air is where the insulation is, not the paper. The paper is not very good, but the air those little air gaps in there is very, very useful. So you do the same thing with cardboard. And you can do the same kind of a thing with, blankets and other materials, and even just getting layers and layers of tarpaulin that have a little bit of space in between them. They will insulate a little bit because that air won't move in those spaces. So yeah, that's what you're trying to do. You want to get into the least cold place you can find, particularly when you're trying to sleep, because your metabolism is lower. And notice I carefully try to use the words and thinking about the attitude. I want to get into the least cold place, not a warm place. Maybe you don't have a warm place. Get over it. It's okay. Get comfortable by doing the best you can with what you have around you.
Wonderful, Jim. This has been really amazing. And obviously there's a lot more information that we could share. Let our audience know where they can connect with you and the information that you have. Okay.
Well, probably the best way to do it is if you go to my website, which is jimsway.com. You register for a newsletter that's there, because I do classes every Wednesday night. Right now, we're focusing almost exclusively on cold weather and winter. So those are Wednesday nights. If you can't attend Wednesday nights, I record them. They're in a library. I'll show you where that is. And then Saturday mornings, I do a Q&A, an open forum Q&A. I have people signing in from Europe and places like that. They're asking questions and everything. There are some things that are recorded there. If you go to the website, to the library, and then in the clothing area, this is about cold weather. So you just go into the clothing. Here's links that you can download to different programs that I produced, a few of them. There's other classes there. And one of them that's a good starter class is, disasters happen in winter too. And this is not just about the clothing. It's about a lot of the other things you can do to take care of yourself. And then those Wednesday night classes, the ones that I've done on cold weather and winter, they're recorded again in the library. Scroll down to the purple button, hit that. That's Wednesdays and Saturday classes. They're in chronological order. You can just read the titles on them and go down, and you'll find these last 2 classes I did on cold weather and winter in there. And then there's others in my library, in the clothing library. There's some other classes in there about winter and those things. I'm doing them all the time. And then I do have I'll say the premier winter class, which is called Winter Without Worries. That is in my subscription library, which is for members. It's $5.99 a month. Join and quit later if you want to. But that class is more than 20 hours going in depth, and I do teach how to make the foam clothing. But we go into great depth about all different kinds of insulation, how and why they work, much more than I can do here. So I'll be glad to share information as much as I can. Come to the classes. Come to Wednesday nights. Come to Saturday.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. We've enjoyed sharing this time with you. For our audience, the question of the day: have you thought about how to deal with a long-term winter or cold disaster, and what are you doing about it? Comment below, and thanks for being part of the solution.